legal and regulatory frameworks for online gaming in the Middle East.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So, unfortunately, Dion can't make it, so instead it's Hilary, Joseph, and I. So, first of all, I'm going to ask. Well, Joseph, you were just on, so unless you want to reintroduce yourself, do you want to have a quick go, and then Hilary?
I need to. Yeah. No, I'm Joe. I'm a lawyer by profession. I am a partner at WH Partners, and we have offices in Malta and the UAE.
My name's Hilary Stewart-Jones. I'm a lawyer by background as well. I've worked in the sector since approximately 1997, and I'm now the CEO and chairman of Skywind Games, which is a content company.
And I am not a lawyer. So I'm a consultant in the gaming industry, and so let's just jump straight into this. So, by the way, I'm Aideen Shortt. I forgot to actually say hello. Right, so just jump straight into this. I mean, one of the questions with regards to gaming, and I think, is should it be regulated when we're talking about esports or video gaming or anything? What's your thoughts? I mean,
I believe that regulation is, I always say, and I said it in the previous panel, I like to say, and I know it sounds bad, but it's so real. Regulation is a necessary evil. So ideally, we shouldn't have regulation. Ideally, we should have self-regulation. But if we put self-regulation, I can assure you that within 1 year, 2 years, one of the operators will fall off the wagon, as they say in Britain, and ultimately, we will end up in a situation where all the others will say, why do I need to abide by regulations if others are not and are making more money? So self-regulation will not work in the long run. Now, but it's a necessary evil only when it's necessary. So the first thing to look at is, do we see any reason why it should be regulated? And if we do, what are the specific issues that need to be regulated? So if you look at the cryptocurrency industry, for example, we all understood what the issues are. It's user protection, it's the customer protection, but also AML and a bunch of other things. In the traditional online gaming industry, we know that there are other matters that need to be looked at. If we look at esports, for example, and skill games, we notice that, yes, there are issues that should be regulated, but possibly they are already adequately regulated by other regulations that exist. So if we look at, for example, match fixing, which is an issue in esports, it's a massive issue in esports, there I believe we have the necessary legislation. It might need to be enhanced, but we don't really need to license tournaments.
but what about having, and I know there's more moves to this now, but there was no central body, like in football, FIFA.
Should there be?
Well, this is a question.
So
I mean,
we know what's happening with FIFA, with UEFA, all the corruption there is. Do we want that?
I think slightly the problem, and I would agree that all of these, the desire for regulation starts from a good place, which is the protection of consumers, and that's.
You have to put it close to your mouth.
And that's a laudable ambition. But it's also, to your point, I think, which becomes slightly difficult, as technology emerges and you have different levels of participation, different activities and different ways in which people are paying to participate, what you don't want to do is necessarily have 10 different regulators to whom the customer needs to turn should there be a problem, and 10 different sets of regulation to which an individual company must adhere. And I certainly see with other regulators in other jurisdictions, I don't think it's so much as land grab as a desire to create consistency.
Okay, because you spoke there about kind of the being paid to play. This is several years ago. I think 2 World Cups ago. And it will have evolved a lot since then. But the winners of an e-gaming sports event won more than the third place footballing team in that World Cup. So there's a lot of incentive, and you know, when you talk to, you know, you were talking about match fixing. There's also a lot. I mean, anecdotally, but there's a lot of drug use, like Adderall and stuff that, you know, that they, you know, the players can stay awake for the long time. I mean, how does that fit? I mean, that's not something, obviously, that's awesome.
But I think any kind of proxy participation really it's not even borderline. That falls squarely with the need to be regulated.
Yeah.
Because of the abuses, as you've rightly said, but because conceptually that probably falls in all cases on that side of gambling rather than this side of gambling.
Because on that one as well, it's there's a doctor that I know, and he works very closely with e-gamers, and even on that side, he's talking about the amount of time that's spent. That there's, you know, there's injuries in wrists because there's no limit, because, you know, he's got some amazing facts, like we move our wrists, let's just say 10 times every minute. A gamer is moving it like 40, 50 times in that space of time. And so there's injuries because people are just spending so much time, and I'm not talking about just professionals. You know, what about kids? What about gamers, you know?
Yes, fair enough, but let's face it. I know people, including myself, to be honest, that when we are feeling a bit down or feeling a bit stressed, one of the therapies that some people have is to actually shop. And I'm like that. I'll go on a website and just make a new wardrobe because I'll go crazy about the stuff. Isn't that a risk? Some people are addicted to that as well. Some people are actually...
Well, anything that gives pleasure can potentially be addictive,
If we continue with regulating everything, and I see us going there slowly, so it's something that worries me a lot. If we're going to continue regulating everything, we're going to have... we already have a lot of over-regulation in this world, especially in Europe. And the more we increase regulation, we're just helping the big guys. So there's this misconception that regulation helps the smaller operators. No, the regulation will help the bigger ones because the bigger ones have the possibility of actually employing 10, 20, 100 compliance people that will assist them to remain in compliance with the law. The smaller guy can never have that power to actually employ so many compliance people, and therefore the smaller ones will be eaten up by the bigger ones. We will not have the possibility of having younger, smaller operators taking over market share from the bigger ones. So I'm afraid of too much regulation. I'm actually very allergic to it. So that's why I said we have to have regulation when it's purely necessary. But I don't see the necessity of this. We need education, definitely. Education, rather than sending our kids to school and not mentioning anything about video games. We should actually have lessons about video games and explaining to them how to actually...
But isn't that precisely the point, which is you've always got to have a mind to those people who are vulnerable. So you're in your right mind, you going and shopping and maybe spending too much. That's a conscious adult decision that you can take on, you know, and that's your civil right to do that. But to Aideen's point, it's just about mass industries. You're talking about not benefiting, you know, the smaller players and only benefiting the bigger players. It's those mass industries that can afford to gear up and create something that's content that's so addictive that it's exploiting a generation.
Amazon does the same, Hilary. Amazon, you get adverts. Whenever you go on a website, you get an advert of what you're looking for on Amazon. So it's happening for everything.
Yeah, and I think actually with that and the you know, the kind of tsunami that we have of digital marketing exploitation, which is now, you know, data protection laws are only just catching up. I think we will all get a lot more savvy about how we're being exploited and how our digital footprint is being exploited all the time. And data protection rights that have evolved now in Europe at least allow the consumer to make demands to see what data is being exploited with principles like the right to be forgotten. But to Aideen's point, certainly with the esports operators, very few of them actually have a very clear imposition of an age limit. Very few of them do KYC in terms of policing that age limit. And as a consequence, as you said, it's generations of younger people being sucked into not necessarily something that they shouldn't do, but they should be more consciously knowing what they're doing as they get sucked into it.
Yeah, so you spoke about GDPR. I want to get on to your other points because you made both of you made some really good ones. But in the meantime, just about GDPR, it's like we've had that conversation up on the Ikigai Venture stage, which is in GDPR in games now, especially in the emergence of kind of the blockchain games. You just take that. It's like you have the right to take back your information. You have the right to your own information. Well, in blockchain, how does that work? You can't actually get your own information back because it's part of the chain. If you take that, if you say I want my information back, the chain breaks. So,
but to be honest, the GDPR has come up. I think the GDPR has. I'm not a big fan of it on many counts, but one thing that it came up with, which is interesting, is privacy by design. So what it is obliging you to do? If you're creating a product, you have to make sure that the product is compliant with GDPR, or else you're in breach of GDPR. And you'll tell me, okay, so who created blockchain is in breach of GDPR? Not really, but
no,
who creates
GDPR
apps on blockchain that do not allow you to actually take away your data? And the only way to do it is by not putting that data on the blockchain. Then yes, technically that person is in breach of GDPR and they should plan with GDPR in mind.
But then, I mean, when it comes to the blockchain games, you're dealing with the situation where, we were talking about esports there, and Hilary, you talked about the companies. At least, where there's a company, they can be, moderated. But when you go to like blockchain games that are decentralized, it's like, there's no one say, it's like there's no level of regulation except self-regulation by the people who are gaming and offering the games.
But it's also, that's the problem, and that's part of the criticism of blockchain, which is there is no one actually centrally responsible. There isn't a big Google or an Apple that you can sue or whoever. You are then entirely at the mercy of that blockchain construct, whoever set that up. And ultimately, it may take data and power away from bigger companies, but it won't be dispersed in a way that it's handed back for complete control by individual citizens as well.
Yeah, so I mean, we've jumped around a bit, so I'm going to keep jumping around, going with the flow of the conversation. So we were talking, Joseph, you were talking there about, kind of everything being, everything that's pleasurable can be addictive. It's like, let's face that.
I'll give you another example. A friend of mine last night, and is still working on it now, started working on the new ChatGPT, the fourth version. He's in Dubai and he spent all night and all day till now chatting with ChatGPT to test it out.
Yeah.
Like, it could be addictive. I had a prospective client who became completely nuts about ChatGPT and thought that this ChatGPT became sentient because it was sort of speaking back to him. So anything could create problems.
Yeah. So, I mean, with that, when it comes back to gaming, I mean, moving from the esports just to the individual person, you were saying, Joseph, about over-regulation. You have in China, they have, in China, they now have a limit on under 18s playing that's actually governed by and managed through facial recognition. And so it's a couple of hours. At a time during a time period. I mean, given that you're kind of conscious about regulation and you're just saying it's too much regulation. I mean, that's gone altogether to a completely opposite dimension than zero regulation.
I mean, it's that's always going to be held up as an extreme. All I would say as a parent, you'd probably be delighted to have that as imposed by the government rather than you imposing your own rules on your children's gameplay. But it's like everything else. If regulations are flexible enough, most important element of it is not to dictate someone's, as I said, someone's decision in their right mind to do a certain thing at a certain time of day. But I suppose it's enabling them to have the tools that should they feel that they have a problem, the protections are there and the regulations are there to back up the elections they're making to, for example, limit the amount of time that they spend doing an activity, limiting the amount of time that they actually spend on that activity. And I think that is not an anathema to me from a civil rights perspective. That's an important consumer tool.
Yeah, I agree with that because there's a concept of flow when it comes to the internet that you just lose all sense of time. I think it's referred to now as just going down the rabbit hole, isn't it? It's like like ChatGPT or Instagram, and suddenly you're like 4 hours in and you're like, okay, I gotta go to sleep. I think with gaming it's more prevalent there that time is kind of elapsing, and time is a currency. I mean, especially these days. But going on to, I have two people standing over there telling us to wrap up, but I want one other question. So I feel very strongly about this, and I'd love to know your thoughts, but loot boxes. So what's the position on regulating those? Because they have been banned or outlawed by so many countries, including, I think, just recently Austria. Joseph?
I believe that loot boxes should be regulated, but they should not be regulated under the traditional online gaming regimes because they are very specific. The first specific thing about them is that they are not, they are part of a larger picture. They are not per se the game. It is just part of the game. But still, I believe that there should be some degree of regulation there, but it should be ad hoc regulation separate from other traditional online gaming regulation.
Yeah, because I even think there's an AML issue there with loot boxes, because you have people that used to, and I presume that still do, they'd get a loot box and then they would sell something on eBay for X number of pounds and came with the code for the loot box.
There is an AML issue with everything.
With everything, yeah.
There's an AML issue with all the supermarkets. Like, when I see a supermarket in every corner, I start thinking, okay, there's something strange
they can't all be making money.
So it's like these things you can't control completely. If we want to get controlled completely, then let's go in a police state. But do we want that?
No, not at all. Hilary, what's your thoughts on loot boxes?
Again, although Joseph's allergic to regulation, I do think they need to be tightly regulated. And also, what's the harm in sweeping it under gambling regulation? It's the thing that's probably the most aligned to it, if not completely aligned. And you've just got to, trust your regulator, have a common sense approach when it comes to regulating a specific product within, the multiverse that is, in terms of everything that's considered gambling. And I'm the first person to always say, you'll go back to basics. Is this product gambling? Is there speculation involved? Do people pay money to participate, and might they win a prize? And once you've got those sort of three ingredients, it's pretty often gambling.
Yeah, and so then subject to regulation. So within gaming, there should be a subsection that is regulated.
I agree that there should be a subsection, but it would be a very small license, sort of, compared to the others. That's exactly what I meant by ad hoc regulation.
Yeah. Okay, we have literally been called off the stage. Sorry, Trudy. Joseph, Hilary, thank you. That was really interesting. That was great. Thank you very much.